Another teen accused of killing a child during what was supposed to be a fun sleepover. Now, the 13-year-old is charged as an adult, and the young victim's mother is reacting to the crime. We're getting insight from a forensic psychiatrist on what might have been going through the alleged killer's mind. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A distraught mother's post on Facebook announced to the world that her child was dead and his own cousin was the suspect that Pennsylvania police had in custody. Authorities say 13-year-old James Campbell stabbed 10-year-old Hunter Meyers multiple times in the head while the boy slept. The two were apparently staying at their grandmother's home for a sleepover when this happened. According to an affidavit of probable cause, troopers with Pennsylvania State Police arrived at the home on August 1st, finding Hunter dead in an upstairs bedroom with a knife beside him. The document reads, quote, "While at the scene, defendant James Cale Campbell was observed to have blood on his pants and feet. He was then transported to PSP Greensburg for an interview. During the interview, Campbell was observed to have multiple linear lacerations on his right hand. He then confessed to stabbing Hunter in the head multiple times." My gosh. I want to bring in forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober to talk more about this case. Dr. Bober, good to have you back here on Sidebar. You know, this isn't the only time that we've had you on recently, unfortunately, to talk about one child allegedly killing another child. What are your thoughts on this one as you hear about it?
Well, obviously, this case is a tragedy any way you look at it. The victim is a child, but the defendant is also a child. So I think we have to remember that, and we know that the child brain is not the same as the adult brain. For example, the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions in the brain, is much more developed relative to another part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is fully developed in adults, and that controls things like executive functioning, organizing, planning, and impulse control. So if you think of the limbic system as the gas and the prefrontal cortex as the brakes, a 13-year-old child is all gas and almost no brakes. So they're not responsible in the same way that an adult is. They don't have the ability to control their impulses, to weigh the future consequences of their actions. And the Supreme Court recognized this in cases like Roper v. Simmons. So this is sort of apples and oranges. So we have to remember that this defendant is a child and should be treated like a child, in my opinion.
And we are going to get to that because my understanding is that this young boy is being tried as an adult. We'll talk about that in a second, but I do want your opinion on the motive here because there is no word on motive. It hasn't been released. There's so much we don't know about this case, about what led up to it. But in your experience, what have we seen in the past when we see violence amongst children? And that's what this is. These are two young children. What have we seen in the past about why someone would do this?
You know, it's funny when I read that the police don't have a motive, even the child may not know their own motive. It could be something they saw on social media. It could be something they saw in a movie. It could be something very simple that as adults, we would not be able to put it together. But in a child's mind and in a way that a child sees the world, it would make sense to them.
You mentioned something about impulse control. It also could have been maybe, and we're speculating here, it could have been an argument that got out of hand, right?
Sure. I mean, I think the victim was supposedly sleeping at the time. It could have been something that they had going on before the child went to sleep. It could have been an argument over using a toy, over using a smartphone. It could have been really anything. But again, as adults, you know, we have the executive functioning abilities, the ability to plan, to organize, to say, hey, I'm just going to let this go. It's no big deal and I'm going to move on. Yeah. But in a child that deals with heightened emotions and the ability or the lack of ability, rather, to control those emotions, it could erupt into something else.
But the use of a knife, right? That is, we've talked about it before, how personal that is.
But
how does someone that young have the wherewithal to do this, to take a knife and allegedly stab their cousin, 10 years old, multiple times in the head? Anybody does that. We say how graphic it is and how you have the ability to even carry on with that. Not just one stab wound, but multiple. That seems to me, I'm struggling with how someone has the wherewithal to do that young.
So we've talked about this in other cases, and I've said to you that I think it's just blind rage. But in a case where it's a child, I almost feel like it's an impulse or it's something they just get into their head and they just do, I don't, again, think they're really thinking about the future consequences of their actions. I think they're just angry, they're upset, and they just act without thinking. And that's what I think we have here.
I want to quickly call out our great sponsor of this episode that helps make Sidebar happen, Upside. So Upside's a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. Now, believe it or not, I do know how to pump my own gas. And when I do, I can use the free Upside app. I mean, why not get cash back when you fill up your tank, right? And yes, this is actual real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight to your bank account. So once you have the Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps in the app and you get paid. Now, as you saw me just do, you can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell. That's just to name a few. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code SIDEBAR and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code SIDEBAR for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. Do you think in these kinds of cases, if you do a background check on this young boy, and by the way, to be clear, innocent until proven guilty, although the evidence really does seem to suggest he did this, do you look back on past incidents and say there were warning signs? Or does it sometimes come out of nowhere? You would have no idea. So even if you were to do a full comprehensive review of this child's life, would there be clues? Would there be warning signs that something like this happened or no?
Well, he's only 13, so it's a pretty limited data set. But according to the mother in the article that I read, there was no history of this type of behavior. So if we find that there was no prior history of mental illness, no trips to a psychiatrist or a behavior specialist, and this child acted completely out of the blue, then maybe this was something that really could not be prevented. Apparently, these kids were best friends. They were cousins, and that they had hung out previously multiple times before without any concerns. So this just may have been a one-off situation where we could not see this coming.
By the way, you probably don't have the answer to this, but I find it interesting that this happened at a sleepover at their grandmother's house. And whenever I cover crimes, I always wonder, where is this happening, right? Where is there, when we're talking about adults, crime of opportunity, committing a crime at a certain time, at a certain geographic location. Now, we're talking about children here, we're having a sleepover. The fact that it happened at the grandmother's house, does that weigh into anything here?
Well, when you read something like this, there's always going to be people that will say, well, why was the child left unsupervised with another child? And I think that's ridiculous in this case, because clearly these two kids had a history together. We don't know, or we don't think there was any history of aggression prior to this incident. So, this is something where it's probably pretty innocent that they were left together, and they had been left together previously. We're going to probably find out. And I don't think you really could have seen it coming, and I don't think that any level of supervision would have changed it, because, at some point people have to go to sleep and these things can happen.
By the way, are you surprised that we have an alleged confession in this case, or is that typical with young defendants?
So it really depends. I'm curious to know if there was a caregiver or an adult or a guardian that was present when the police interviewed the child. I know that in some jurisdictions there has to be an adult there. So I'm also wondering about that too, but I definitely see multiple lines of attack, so to speak, for the defense in terms of this case, because maybe there should be an adult that was present that wasn't. And again, there's, of course, capacity issues with the child's age and the nature of the offense.
You're talking about not only this confession coming in,
but the act itself.
I don't mean the confession like it's not a legitimate confession. I'm just saying it's a confession or alleged confession. But you're saying about the act itself. I mean, what would be a defense here?
That the child lacked the capacity to form the necessary intent to commit the crime, again, because of their age, the fact that they're emotionally immature, have an underdeveloped impulse control, unable to weigh the future consequences of their actions. I think there's definitely an argument that lack of capacity would protect the child, or at least reduce criminal responsibility.
We're going to get to this legal case in a second. I do want to talk about something else with this, that Hunter's mom, Dorothy, she's been keeping friends and family updated on this case, and her family's grieving on her Facebook page. And in the days after the murder on Thursday, She posted multiple times saying, quote, James was my son's cousin and my nephew. No, there is no blood relation, but it doesn't take blood to be a family. Hunter and James were cousins and best friends. The list of people that watch my children is extremely small, and he had stayed at his grandma's with his best friend a million times. We had no
Like I said.
warning on anything, right? And she also goes on to say that as Hunter's mother, I am asking for compassion for James. He has already confessed and is being charged as an adult, and yes, I am pushing for that. He brutally murdered my son, his cousin and best friend. My son was asleep and never had a chance to react or be scared. That's what I am clinging to right now. The only people you're hurting by running your mouth about him and his family, including us. So please just stop. Say my son's name, Hunter William Scott Meyers, instead of flashing all of this hate. Now, Meyers had asked multiple times for people not to attack the alleged killer online, saying that only fuels more hatred. She shared a photo of Hunter with one of their pets saying, if you take nothing else from this, please keep all of the hate about the other child to yourself. This is not an adult. He is a child. Did he brutally murder my child? Yes. If anyone has the right to hate him, it is us, and we don't, so no one else has that right. Dr. Bober, that is such an interesting reaction from the parent here. What do you take away from this?
I think that's a mom with a very enlightened sense of decency. She is actually trying to protect the defendant who murdered her son. And she, even in her worst nightmare, is able to see that, again, this is a child that committed this crime against another child, and that the child that committed the crime deserves compassion. So I think that that's pretty amazing that she has that reaction. It says a lot about her and her character in this situation.
How does a parent, how does a mom, how does a father, how do they process? There's one thing to process the death of their child at such a young age, but then also to realize who allegedly committed this act. How do they even go recover from this? How do they even process what happened?
So unfortunately, I've treated many patients who have lost their children, and what I can tell you is that life is never the same after that. They struggle to find any happiness in their life, and they just try to find peace inside their own head. They try to find joy in life, but it's a struggle, and many of them struggle for many years with chronic depression, and they're never able to move on with their lives because I say this to patients all the time. I can't think of anything worse than the death of a child, and especially in this case in such a horrific manner.
In his obituary, Hunter was described as bright and intelligent. It says, quote, he wanted to be a diesel mechanic and a police officer when he grew up. Hunter loved riding quads, going fishing with his dad and Uncle Jerry, cuddle time with his mom, spending time with his siblings and animals. His favorite subject in school was math, and he was absolutely brilliant at it. He was kind, caring, smart, strong-willed, charismatic, brave. Hunter's funeral scheduled for Thursday, and when he died, Hunter was just weeks away from his 11th birthday, just 10 years old. Both the boys attended the same school, which announced that it will have counselors available for fellow students when the school year starts back up, because it's going to be difficult for them to process this. And as for this suspect, 13-year-old James Campbell, he is charged with criminal homicide and first-degree murder. He's being tried in adult court. Now, Dr. Bober, let's talk about this. If I'm teasing what you said, you do not believe it is appropriate for him to be tried as an adult?
I think there's a departure between what's legally appropriate based on what the court thinks and what I think is scientifically appropriate in terms of the child's neurodevelopment. I do not think that it's appropriate that this child be charged as an adult because, again, they are in fact a child and they have different capacities, different skills, different levels of development from an adult.
But you're also looking at that without knowing the full context of what this child said or the circumstances surrounding the killing, right? If this child came out and said, yeah, I wanted to kill him, I knew what I was doing, would you have a different perspective?
Even if the child said that, I would still not assign the same level of culpability or responsibility to a child this age when compared to an adult. So I am not saying that the child bears no responsibility for what happened. I am not saying the child should not be punished. But in this particular case, I think with a child defendant like this, I think you have to focus more on rehabilitation rather than punishment, because this child is just at the beginning of his life. and he probably made a very impulsive decision that he was unable to think through completely and what the consequences of that decision would be.
Right, because you're talking about if this goes to juvenile court, and particularly if a mental health defense comes up, there is a chance through rehabilitation and treatment, this child could be released one day. If he's tried in adult court, we're dealing with a different situation and a different kind of punishment. I will end with this, that the family has started a GoFundMe page to help pay for funeral costs. We're going to put it up there if anybody wants to support. Just a really, really sad case, tragedy here, and it's tough to talk about. It's kind of an unexplainable situation, doesn't make sense, and we're sending our best and prayers and best wishes to the family because they definitely need it at this time. Dr. Bober, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.